Everyone's saying Silksong is way harder than Hollowknight, and they're right.
Yeah, okay, I'm sure it is. Yeah, maybe they're right. Ladies and gentlemen, 2025 blew right past us, and as gamers, we were blessed with some pretty great releases to spend the time. Whether arcadey survivors fun with Megabonk, visual novel mystery with Last Defense Academy, or drifting tracks of Sonic Crossworlds Racing, my own backlog collected tons of dust while I was tied down with so many new choices. That being said, a subset of folks, a very dedicated group of fans, would receive a gift, a sign from the heavens themselves on a faithful April morning that their years-long patience would be rewarded with the long-awaited release of Hollowknight Silksong. For those who don't know, Silksong is a direct sequel to the 2017 critically acclaimed game Hollowknight. It's a hauntingly beautiful but deceptively difficult 2D platformer where you play as a silent knight exploring the vast, ruined underground kingdom of Hallownest. You're working to uncover the source of a plague that has turned the once peaceful bug inhabitants mad. All the while collecting new abilities, defeating tough bosses, and discovering secrets tucked around every corner. Hollowknight was developed by an extremely small group of indie developers named Team Cherry. The game was truly loved by many who had played it and were frothing at the mouth when Team Cherry announced not a DLC, but a fully dedicated sequel had been in development back in February of 2019. After years of silence from the team, fans would receive little to no information about the game, with some questioning whether it would ever see the light of day.
Oh, sorry guys. No Silksong.
Niente, finiti i Carpathia.
Sadly, no Silksong news, but as I said the other day, I'm convinced that it's either going to be like in the indie developer.
Give me the scissor reel, and then let's lock the fuck in.
This is like the fast thing.
And now it's sizzle reel. Sorry, I'm gonna mute the music.
Oh no, please don't let Silksong be like a fucking little thingy.
Holy shit!
I can't believe it. Team Cherry's done it. The dream is real and Silksong is actually coming out. However, after finally getting into the hands of consumers, Team Cherry's newest release was hit with some division. You see, Hollowknight was well known for being a very challenging, but equally rewarding game, and Hollowknight Silksong, well... it's a lot harder. At least it feels harder to most players who have experienced the original game. After playing both games myself, finishing with all endings and most of the achievements, bar those speed or challenge runs, I noticed a lot of interesting design decisions that were made here and knew it had to be discussed. Together, let's explore these different areas of design that influence the increased difficulty, alongside discussing my own feeling toward Team Cherry's long-awaited follow-up, Hollowknight Silksong. Metroidvanias, a portmanteau of Metroid and Castlevania. This term is used colloquially to describe video games with utility and exploration-gated progression, typically within a single, continuous, interconnected map. These games drive a non-linear progression path by drip-feeding new abilities which may significantly change the player's direct movement or offer other unique ways to interact with the world. A common scenario would be reaching a perceived dead end in a hallway or room, only to come back later with an upgrade that opens up an entirely new path for the player to progress. These progression gates can be used in great level design to offer the player flexibility in exploring the world. It allows for multiple obvious and potentially hidden paths that can be found and traveled in order to continue the game proper. Similar to the original game, Team Cherry uses this philosophy in Hollowknight Silksong in order to give players choices in going where they want and doing what they want, but simultaneously designing the environments to guide the player towards the next boss, the next upgrade and next area, only moving forward at that individual player's pace. Before proceeding, let's set a baseline for our discussion and the unique setting of the world. A core aspect of Metroidvanias as a genre is the unique sense of exploration and discovery of the unknown that all new players will get while playing through for the first time. Not even considering story or lore implications, simply the act of moving from one environment to another, the relationship between the areas of the world, the enemies found within, and how the player interacts with them through the game mechanics. Everything is fresh and wondrous the first time around, and as you are exposed to them, your natural pattern recognition kicks in, and there's a sense of innate reward and growth from that first playthrough that's either tainted or even lost completely during subsequent playthroughs. All of this to say, we can't talk about Silksong without spoiling something. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the game's exploration-based design, and us needing to break it open for review. That being said, I will keep the topics themselves as neutral as possible, and give a warning for any topics that I believe will require significant contextualizing. My goal here is to discuss the game, but not act as a direct replacement for experiencing it. Let's talk setting. Silksong has us take on the role of Hornet as our protagonist. Kidnapped from her home in Hollowknight and brought to the land of Farloom, she manages to escape her entrapment and falls to the depths. Using her needle and thread, Hornet meets allies and foes alike, climbing towards the top of Farloom Citadel in order to understand the true nature of why she was whisked away to these unfamiliar lands. Silksong plays as a 2D action platformer. You could even call it a Souls-like platformer. Really what this means is that, nestled within the exploration of the game, you'll be traversing across landscapes of floating platforms, walled hallways or shafts, while discovering and fighting a huge roster of unique insect-themed enemies. Platforming feels great from the get-go. After starting a new game and taking control of Hornet, you'll find yourself in the Moss Grotto, an unassuming, vibrant cavern with similarly themed, slow-moving, non-aggressive enemies. This environment allows the player to get used to the control of the game at their own pace, and delivers a natural exposure to the feeling of Hornet, her movements and attacks relative to the game world. One thing that I love is that except for key mechanics being introduced later in the game, there's no direct tutorial thrown into the player's face here. With one exception being a forced player interaction before you're even allowed to move. A button prompt to bind Hornet's thread will heal her for 3 additional health, bringing her total up to 4. This is 1 less than her total capacity, which is 5. It's an extremely low effort engagement from the player, and you'll likely not even realize what's just occurred, but it's a perfect way to quickly and organically cue you into the core healing mechanic of the game. From there, the game tunnels towards the left. There's immediately ledges present, so of course new players will press buttons until they realize they can jump up those ledges. Then a wall of vines, and if you look closely, there's empty space between them and a hue of light emphasizing these particular vines against the backdrop of the rest of the environment. Here again, the game immediately forces a new player to press their buttons until attacking with the needle. The vines don't immediately fall, the collision of the attacks cause the vines to move and Hornet to rebound, taking up to 4 swings before finally breaking open the path to proceed. When a tutorial is efficient and contextualized to the world itself, we tend to take it for granted, but if you put yourself in the shoes of a first-time or non-gamer, Even the first minute of Silksong teaches you multiple core aspects of the game without telling you anything. Hornet can heal 3 health, she can jump, she can attack. Some walls may block progression and need to be destroyed by attacking them. Expecting visual and audio feedback from those breakable walls that are different from everything else in the fore or background. The very next room continues these lessons. A floating platform, Hornet's jump has a minimum and maximum carry distance both vertically and horizontally. Mossy caterpillar enemies are present, and you'll find that they can damage you on contact, but they can also be defeated easily if attacked with the needle. Enemies that you defeat will drop items called shell shards, and if you're observant, you'll see the spool of thread beneath Hornet's health bar increase by 1 with each hit on an enemy. Making your way to the left, you'll also be faced with a wall that's just too high for Hornet to clear with her jump. However, if you hold the jump to its maximum while moving towards the wall, she'll latch onto the nearby ledge and fling herself forward into a front tuck right over the ledge. It seems like a no-brainer, but this in particular is a massive tell for new players and those returning from the first game. Unlike in the original Hollowknight, Hornet is agile. She has no trouble clambering over obstacles and will even dance around the environment like a gymnast when she does it. The next few rooms here help to cement those previous lessons learned, with a taste of explorative freedoms in small side paths that are confined to the same area, but require additional platforming to reach. Congratulations! Within the span of 2 minutes, the game has taught you how to heal, navigate platforms, deal with combat, explore the unknown, and maybe even find hidden items tucked away. There are even moments where the game will softly remind the player of certain mechanics as well. Say you have a full bar of thread and take damage down to 2 or 1 health. The game will present a button prompt for binding at the bottom of the screen, and hopes that the player sees it, hits the button, and realizes that connection between their health bar, their thread bar, and that particular button that was used to heal. Following through the caverns, you'll reach your first bench, a checkpoint of sorts which also acts to heal Hornet completely, placed strategically just before the first boss fight. The bench is softly illuminated with a focusing light and particles floating off as Hornet approaches. It immediately draws your attention to it, as something important that sticks out from the environment. Team Cherry really needs to pat themselves on the back for this entire opening segment. You're getting a full taste of every aspect of the core game loop here, all with the game itself implying the use of movement, implying combat and healing by placing platforms or enemies in certain places that causes the player to naturally build the early blocks of pattern recognition that are needed throughout the rest of the game. The environment itself is appealing to the eyes and ears. The enemies are unopposing. There's no feeling of pressure here. Only the invisible hand of the developers guiding you through these first steps as you begin and continue to get acclimated with Hornet and how you, as the player, interact with the world of Farloom. Once the first boss is defeated, you'll work your way towards the first major hub area of the game within Bone Bottom. Now, there are several hub areas scattered throughout the world, and they serve mechanically to provide players a safe North Star to orient themselves while navigating the broader environment. Many NPCs can also be found and conversed with while in these areas, some acting as a shop to trade items with, others potentially offering more unique services. Now, shops and other trading in the game would be based around Rosary beads. These are a unique, farmable currency that the player has yet to come across, as not all enemies in the game will carry and drop rosaries from defeat. Separate from the hub acting as a safe space for the player and NPCs alike, you'll also find wish walls present. The wish wall acts as an in-universe notice or quest board, allowing the player to choose to accept different tasks that they might want to work towards while exploring the ever-expanding world of Farloom. There's never really a reason to not take these on, as you'll be provided with useful rewards, and most wishes or quests will be fairly straightforward in completing almost naturally just as you're progressing through the game world. Wishes themselves can also be accepted through interacting with different characters that you might meet through your travels as well, so it's always a great idea to talk to as many different folks as you can. Just be sure to keep one eye open, as some wishes might reward more than you've bargained for. As you explore, you'll come across different types of upgrades that help modify Hornet's movement and provide thread-based skills that make traversal and combat get a bit more and more mechanically deep as the game progresses. Using early game examples, Hornet gains access to the Silk Spear. This is a combat technique that allows you to launch your needle forward and pierce any enemies in its path, dealing 3 times the damage of a normal attack. Hornet also quickly gains the ability to dash and sprint, which acts both as a benefit for traversal. Of course, sprinting allows you to cover distances much quicker, but you also gain a large combat benefit through the dash itself. You see, in Silksong, Hornet's movement abilities carry momentum. Within this specific example, the dash can be used both on the ground and in air to provide a quick, single burst movement in any direction. Helpful when you need to quickly reposition yourself relative to a group of enemies, or even just one large big boy. Holding down the dash button turns it into a sprint. Again, useful for navigation, but also unlocks a unique dash or running attack that Hornet gains access to in combat. The dash attack itself isn't just a normal attack. It includes its own unique properties which stand out in the player's mind for usage. Dash at an enemy, attack them, and Hornet will carry the momentum of the attack, flinging herself up and over the target. If you hadn't yet figured it out, each hit of the needle carries a weighted momentum with it. This also extends into combat from the air as well. Hornet can swing her needle in 4 directions, left and right, of course, swinging upward, catching airborne enemies, and while Hornet herself is in the air, she can attack downward towards enemies below. Though, interestingly enough, the downward strike is not a straight downward animation. In fact, Hornet's downward strike carries her diagonally towards the direction that she's facing. Now, this can prove to be a bit tricky as the player works to internalize the spacing needed to successfully perform the attack. Similar to the dash attack, if Hornet strikes at an enemy from above and her momentum is carried, she'll be launched upward and away from the enemy, keeping her airborne for just a few seconds more. Chaining downward attacks allows you to effectively bounce off of enemies and perpetually keep Hornet in the air. As long as you can successfully continue the downward strike, Hornet doesn't have to touch the ground. The Hollowknight community refers to this unique blend of movement and combat as Pogo or Pogoing. The naming convention should be fairly self-explanatory here. Though interestingly enough, with Hollowknight and its sequel Silksong having popularized the mechanic, its traces can be found way back on the original NES. Silksong also gives us the concept of tools, which appear as collectible upgrades throughout the game. Tools come in 3 different varieties and can significantly augment the gameplay with very specific purpose. Red tools are active, consumable weapons that can be refilled when resting at benches with the cost of shell shards. Blue tools provide more defensive and combat-based passive effects. Yellow tools offer similar passives, but they focus on augments for navigation, resources, and movement management. I don't want to dig into too many specifics here, as there are a ton of these tools lying around Farloom, and some of the effects get really crazy. But early game, you're likely forever keeping the compass equipped, because it places a moving icon on the map that shows Hornet's current position. It's helpful not to get lost, and yes, it means that if you do not have the compass equipped, at least for a first playthrough, you're probably getting lost. Hell, I was getting lost with it equipped. Now, all of these different options are great, but that's just what they are. Options. You see, there's a limit to the number of tools that you can have equipped at any given time. Team Cherry did something unexpected in the form of a very unique mechanic called Cress. Now, I'm going to be very particular about how this is explained and shown, as this is definitely one of the most interesting mechanics, and I don't want to reveal too much for those who haven't played Silksong. You see, Cress serve a dual purpose mechanically within the game. First, depending on which crest is equipped, you will have a dedicated and varied number of different colored tools and skill slots for your use. This means that depending on the crest equipped, you can have builds that vary wildly from one another due to the forced variety of tool slot composition. Oh, and the crests also completely change Hornet's base movement. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard that right. Depending on the crest you have equipped, Hornet's entire attack animation profile and attack damage profile changes. Whether it's your normal grounded attacks, upward, downward, and dashing, everything is changed. What an absolutely awesome mechanic this is. There's an incredible amount of compounded flexibility here. As you play and collect and try these different crests, new players will naturally gravitate towards crests that fit their own preferred playstyle and tool builds. For myself, once I collected one of the mid-game crests, it matched my desired playstyle and combat mannerisms so well that even after unlocking new options later on, even ones that I thought would be super cool to play with, I ultimately stuck to the ones that felt the most natural and the most fun for me to play with. Each crest also includes its own unique, sort of hidden effect that further augments your gameplay. I'll leave this a bit more ambiguous for folks to find and test themselves, but they're pretty neat. Alright, now that we've gotten our feet under us, I want to spend some time discussing the combat, more so the flow of combat, the variety present in it, both for the player, but as well as the designer of particular encounters, enemies, and bosses. Then we can touch on the difficulty that's derived from all of this. Combat in Silksong is contextualized in 3 different scenarios. The first are roaming enemies. These are your cave crawlers, your ant warriors, and so on that appear naturally through different areas of the game. They may move around a bit, but typically they're isolated to specific portions of a room or platform as you're entering and leaving certain areas. A lot of the times, these enemies are strategically placed in the environment to almost guarantee an interaction, either intended or not, by the player. Hornet simply comes across these enemies doing their own thing, and you can choose to ignore them, even hunt them for resources, or get face blasted by a big skull boy, you know, whatever. These environmental enemies don't necessarily drive difficulty, at least not in a direct sense. Rather, by designing environments themselves with characteristics that complement the enemies in mind, Team Cherry can make a simple corridor run feel much more hostile than you'd otherwise expect. You know, you need to jump over to a particular ledge to progress, but as soon as you land, well, you may have just aggroed a flying enemy mid-jump, and there's another aggressive enemy that's present on that new platform. If you're overly cautious, then you'll likely be scanning and proactively clearing new rooms of threats as you're progressing. However, there's a lot of time where you just don't have the time. You might be revisiting an old area, just passing through as a tourist, and then you take damage from a random enemy because you weren't paying attention. This then launches Hornet into a wall of spikes, and boom! You're almost dead. Fantastic. As you gain new movement abilities, navigating the world becomes only more and more efficient. However, your own ability to parse spacing and placement of enemies will also get better. What I'm saying is that while your first time accessing an area, you'll likely find some concern and issue with traversal, but this anxiety only becomes lesser and lesser as you're exposed to the environment's design and as the game itself continues to provide you with more methods of traversal. The second combat scenario that Silksong has are gauntlets. These are arena-style rooms where the game closes off a particular area after you enter, locking you from progressing or retreating, and then they launch multiple waves of enemies at you. It's kill or be killed, last man standing. Once you come out ahead, all doors open up and you're free to go. I can imagine a good number of people might get frustrated with these rooms. They effectively act as minor skill checks throughout the game, ensuring that a player can only proceed past them with solid mechanical prowess and supportive builds for their playstyle. The gauntlets can feel strenuous at times, though not necessarily unfair. As mentioned, this is a situation where the game has locked you in a room and then throws waves of enemies at you. A key to navigating these challenges can involve a good mix of memory use, a moment-to-moment problem solving, and reflexes. Enemies in Silksong have all fairly unique movement and attack patterns. They might clamber slowly or dash towards you quickly. The attacks might include tackling, darting in and out and smacking you with a weapon, or even attacking at range. Individual enemies usually serve a specific purpose in combat, as good enemy design usually works in games. In fact, the enemies in Silksong usually are not so one note, and may have multiple aspects to how they engage in a battle. When in isolation, none of them are so complex that the player can't manage to fight them with no issue. However, when you start to stack multiples of enemies in a small room together, all serving supporting purposes in battles, the developer's task to the player becomes a lot more demanding. They expect you to look at each enemy, consider their movement. Do they fly? Do they crawl or run? Which of these enemies will die the quickest or the slowest? Maybe you'll change up your usual tactics to deal with one specific enemy, because they mess up the flow of your usual playstyle. Similar to the enemies which appear organically throughout the world, these gauntlets also become easier and easier based on your own individual mechanical progression, familiarity, and memory with the waves and the enemies that spawn. alongside, of course, your equipped build and abilities that have been gained up to that point. In fact, I remember struggling against a particular gauntlet, getting absolutely swept multiple times, back to back to back, then sitting back, and realizing that there were really usually one or two suspects, one or two particular enemies that were really giving me trouble. So I would then spend just a bit more time to focus on understanding those enemies before changing my tactics to focus on solving those problems, before finally crushing past them for the win. Now, Silksong has some pretty incredible bosses. Firstly, there's a lot of them. They're all extremely distinct, not only to each other, but also to other enemies relative to the biome that they appear in. I can think back to my playthrough and have multiple boss encounters which are likely stuck in my head for a long time to come. When you think of great and engaging boss battles in a game, they likely share certain key characteristics. There's typically not just one single aspect that makes a good boss fight memorable. But where Silksong is concerned, there's definitely a few key factors of design that ensures nearly every fight lodges itself deep into your memory banks. One of the more prominent factors of the boss design is their diversity in identity, and the same diversity is the key to the perceived Souls-esque difficulty that a lot of players feel when progressing through the game. When you meet a new boss in Silksong, they immediately stand out visually compared to anything else in that same biome. Though visual characteristics might be shared with other enemies in the area, the boss carries certain imposing features in its design which simultaneously cues the player into the combat style of that particular enemy. A large enemy would usually be weighty or floaty with larger hitboxes, while smaller framed enemies typically means they're going to be lighter on their feet and possibly more difficult to nail down and get some hits on. If you remember us talking about the gauntlets, a lot of the difficulty there stems from the diversity of enemy types included in the arena, and the different problems posed by their mixing being thrown at the player to juggle and tackle how they choose. The boss encounters in Silksong do not typically have the luxury of throwing multiples of different enemies at you. Instead, the single boss themselves needed to be designed to perform the multiple jobs that a group of basic mob enemies would do. So, they tend to do that. And a lot more. If we go back to Hornet's own movement, her ability to quickly move in and out of combat both on the ground and in the air, Team Cherry needed to account for all possible distances and movement types that a player might use during the length of the battle. You want to walk around without jumping? No, you won't. The boss has an attack that covers the full length of the ground. Want to try pogoing and bounce off the enemy's head until they die? No, you're not. The boss has a close range area of effect which will hit you unless you keep your distance. The developers gave each boss a wide and unique set of movements and attacks that not only are entirely unique amongst themselves, but act as a direct counter to the insane amount of options and freedom that the players themselves are given. One mechanic that Team Cherry implemented to give players a bit of breathing room during these intense counters is the stun system. If you hit a boss enough times in quick succession, they'll be momentarily stunned, giving you a critical window of opportunity. This is where the game opens up player choice in a really elegant way. Do you use this precious few seconds to back off, settle your nerves and heal up, or do you press your advantage and rush in for extra free damage while they're defenseless? It's a small mercy in an otherwise relentless fight, but it's also a test of your risk management. The safe play is to heal and reset. The greedy play is to pour on damage and potentially end the fight faster, but if you misjudge the timing and they recover, you might eat a punishing counter. This risk-reward decision happens multiple times per fight, and your choices in these moments can completely change the flow of a boss encounter. It's another example of Team Cherry respecting player agency. They give you the tools and the opportunities, but you decide how to use them. Different attacks are great, but it's the intelligence of the game to ensure the bosses maintain not only a certain amount of unpredictability in their movements, but the enemy will actively react to your specific style of play and throw out their own counter to attack you. This behavior appears in many different games, usually coined as punish mechanics. You see, a good game developer will design a boss so that the boss reacts to what the player is doing. A great developer will design the same boss to predict what the player will do, and an even better one will condition the player to do it. Let me explain. So let's quickly jump over to fighting games to help with this example. In the fighting game community, you'll have the term footsies thrown around. Typically, footsies refers to players in and out of empty space between themselves, vying for pressure and control. As soon as an attack is made by either player, footsies is broken within that instance, and the attack either connects or whiffs, and if the attack whiffs, the opposing player then has an opportunity to punish that mistake, typically uncontested. Decent fighting game players will learn to read their opponent's responses to certain situations, and then they'll exploit that repetitiveness for an advantage. The example that we can all appreciate is the Street Fighter fireball spam. To some, it's a cheap tactic, but for the one using it, they're simply exploiting the other player's lack of experience and repeated natural response. Bosses in tons of action games use very similar tactics in forcing particular reactions and then punishing players who fall into the trap. Of course, the question then is asked, how this would even be possible for a game's AI to do. Player versus player interactions in fighting games are happening insanely fast, with decisions, micro decisions, that are being computed and actioned on at the peak of reaction speeds. To get around this gap in artificial intelligence versus human intent, some games are programmed to read the player's most recent controller input. They then consider the most likely action the player is doing just at that moment. The enemy will then react almost instantly to counter that. When this happens, it feels unnatural, almost like the game itself has bent its own rules to allow the enemy an unfair advantage. So is that it? Are the bosses in Silksong somehow cheating? Are they just reading our inputs and reacting faster than our eyes can see? Well, no, not really. The bosses in Silksong don't need to cheat, as their attacks and movements are designed in a way that ensures fairly specific, likely responses from the players. That likely, or average player response is the key point of exploitation, and the bosses themselves will often train and exploit your decision-making throughout the duration of the fight. The game's AI will normally consider the player's orientation in the area, whether mid-air, against a wall, or on the ground, and then the distance between the player and the enemy, the direction that the player is moving, and if the player is moving at all. A common response you'll see in boss fights, and similarly across other action games, is the concept of a heal punish. This means that if the player attempts to heal within an improper window, the boss's programming will react to this action specifically in an otherwise overly aggressive manner, usually with a long-range, speedy attack to catch the player mid-healing animation. The only answer on the receiving end is to slowly adapt and play against that conditioning. Now, depending on your own playstyle and build, there's some flexibility in how this will manifest, but usually it boils down to learning proper spacing, recovering animation frames, and this would mean the timing just after a boss misses an attempted movement or attack, and then learning when healing and other utility-based skills are safe for you to do. Gradually, you'll begin to read between the lines more and more, slowly inching towards progress in that fight, until finally, not only did you win, you'd likely be capable of doing it again in your sleep. Once you adapt, once you've solved the puzzle, you've conquered the difficulty of that challenge. Well, at least until the next boss decides to take you for a ride. The world of Farloom is big, and I mean deceptively large, but the craziest part about its size is just how dense the world is. There's no wasted space. Every area is chock full of a unique blend of enemies, NPCs, items, traps, and secrets. You can tell within the first hour of the game that Team Cherry focused a lot of their efforts in designing each individual room to be distinctly memorable to the player. Every room is handcrafted with clear developer intent. Enemy placement relative to a spike wall, the space between different platforms. The game is designed with both Hornet's base and maximum movement potential in mind. Early game enemies do not feel any less designed than late game areas, but of course they do account for the player's lack of movement options. As you continue traveling the world, you'll come across various side paths which you strictly cannot access until later in the game. Hollowknight Silksong is a beautiful game. There's an incredible amount of depth in how the colors and audio collaborate to create such a detailed and visually distinctive world. Every room entered feels unique. Team Cherry ensured that even outside of the in-game cartography, your mind will naturally begin to build a mental map based on key locations such as the hubs, then branching out to their closest areas, slowly growing out further and further. You'll likely latch on to certain key characteristic of a room, contextualize within an area, then relate that to something nearby. For a first playthrough, unless you have a really good memory, you likely won't internalize everything. The world of Farloom is again absolutely massive. However, you'll be inclined to latch on to certain areas, remembering where you may have fought a specific boss or where you had found an NPC or an interactable within the environment. Let's talk about how Team Cherry uses color as a narrative and emotional tool. In Silksong, color is doing work in the background of your brain, conditioning an emotional response to each area before you even realize what's happening. Take the Moss Grotto and Bone Marrow, your starting areas. The moment you drop into the world, you're greeted with vibrant greens, moss, vines, flora clinging to the gray stone and bone. It's a color palette that says life exists here. The green is lush, but not overwhelming, tempered by those gray and white bones jutting through the environment. It's welcoming enough to not feel oppressive, but carries just enough visual weight to remind you that Farloom has a history, and that history hasn't necessarily been kind. As you descend further into the Marrow proper, the balance shifts, the greens fade, gray becomes the dominant color, cold stone, bleached bone, rocky caverns that feel less like a living ecosystem and more like the skeletal remains of something much larger. It's a subtle transition, but your brain picks up on it. The world is pulling you deeper, away from that surface level vitality and into something further away, more beastly. Then you hit the deep docks. Red, orange, black, fire with molten metal. This is an industrial space, a forge, a place where things are built and things are destroyed in equal measure. The heat is almost palpable through the screen, where the moss grotto felt organic and the marrow felt skeletal. The deep docks feels artificial. It's the heartbeat of labor, of creation through flame. The reds and oranges aren't just aesthetically striking, they're oppressive. They make the space feel hotter, more claustrophobic and dangerous. You're not just navigating platforms here, you're dodging the very environment itself as walls of lava and hot floors threaten actual harm to Hornet. What's brilliant about Team Cherry's approach here is that these aren't hard cuts between areas. The transitions are gradual, almost imperceptible at first. The Moss Grotto's greens don't just vanish when you enter the marrow, they linger at the edges, then softly fade as the gray stone takes over. By the time you realize the world has shifted, you're already conditioned to the new space. It's environmental storytelling through color gradients. It's incredibly effective. Now, here's where things get interesting from a technical perspective. If you've been playing Silksong and thought, man, the lighting just feels different, there's a good chance a part of this is inspired by the Tyndall effect. For those unfamiliar, the Tyndall effect is a phenomenon where light scatters through particles suspended in a medium. Think of sunlight cutting through fog or a flashlight beam in a dusty room. In Silksong, Team Cherry uses this effect constantly. Almost every single screen has particles floating through the air, little motes of dust and pollen or ash depending on the area. These particles catch the light and give the world an ethereal, almost dreamlike quality. In the Moss Grotto, the particles are soft greens and whites, drifting lazily like spores released from the fungal blooms. In the marrow, they shift to grays and reds, giving the caves an ancient, undisturbed feeling. In deep docks, they're embers of bright oranges and yellows that flicker and die. It's a subtle touch, but it does so much heavy lifting. These particles give the world depth. They make the environments feel three-dimensional. Real, in a way. But here's the kicker. These particles don't just exist for visual flair, they also serve in transitioning between areas. As you move from one biome to another, the particles gradually shift in color and density. The green spores of the Moss Grotto don't just stop at an invisible line, they mix with the gray dust of the marrow for a few screens, creating a visual blend that makes the transition feel organic. Your brain doesn't register it as, oh, I've entered a new area of the game. It registers it as, I've just traveled deeper into this world. It's an incredibly smart design choice that reinforces the interconnectedness of Farloom without needing a single line of dialogue or UI prompt to show you. Let's talk about light. Specifically, let's talk about how Team Cherry uses darkness and light as both a mechanical and world-building tool. Hornet carries a light source with her, a soft, glowing orb that illuminates the environment directly around her body. It's not a bright light, it doesn't flood the screen, it's intimate, almost like candlelight. The illumination is strongest right at Hornet's position, then gradually fades into blur as it extends outward. This creates a natural focal point. Wherever Hornet is, that's where our eyes will go. In a game as visually dense as Silksong, it would be very easy to get overwhelmed by detail. By using darkness to frame the playable space, Team Cherry ensures you're always looking at what matters. Hornet, the platform she's on, the enemies nearby, and the immediate path forward. The use of shadow also creates claustrophobia. In tight corridors where the walls close in, the platforms narrow, darkness doesn't just frame the space, it compresses it. The light around Hornet becomes a visible bubble, and the world outside that bubble feels oppressive and threatening. You're squeezing through a space that feels too small, too tight, too hostile. It's environmental storytelling through the use of lighting, and it's incredibly effective at making certain areas feel more dangerous than they otherwise might be. Team Cherry also uses selective light sources in the environment to guide player movement and create visual interest. Glowing crystals, bioluminescent fungi, flickering lanterns, these aren't just set dressing, they're breadcrumbs. Your eye will naturally track towards light in a dark space. So, by placing light sources strategically, Team Cherry can subtly nudge you towards the intended path without ever needing an arrow or a waypoint. It's an elegant design that respects your intelligence as a player. One of the most staggering aspects of Silksong is just how many unique enemies there are, and I do mean unique. This isn't a game where you fight the same enemy with a palette swap and call it a day. Every single enemy in Silksong has its own distinct design, movement patterns, attack animations, and behavioral quirks. The sheer variety is kind of insane when you stop to think about it. But here's what makes it even more impressive. Every enemy feels like it belongs to its environment. These are creatures that feel like they evolved to live in these specific spaces. Take the Moss Grotto. The enemies here are slow, lumbering, plant-like. They blend into the environment visually. Their green and brown hues making them almost camouflage against the stone. Their movement is deliberate, almost lazy, which matches the pace of the environment itself. It's an area designed for new players, so the enemies are forgiving, but they're not generic. They have personality, weight, and visual presence. Move into the Marrow, and the enemy design shifts. Here, you're fighting creatures that feel more predatory, more aggressive. They're bone white, grayscale, with sharper edges and faster and heavy-hitting movements. The environment is harsher, so the enemies are too. They match the color palette, making them feel like extensions of the environment rather than invaders in it. When you hit the deep docks, the enemies become industrial. They're covered in metal, diving, or mining outfits, previous workers from the mines that have gone hostile. Others are organic creatures that have simply adapted to live in the forge's oppressive heat. The visual language is consistent: red, orange, brown, metallic. Every enemy you fight in the deep docks looks like it crawled out of a furnace, and that cohesion makes the environment feel unified in its identity. But Team Cherry doesn't stop at visual cohesion. The enemy's behavior also matches their environments. In tight corridors, you'll fight enemies that are designed to block your path or force you into uncomfortable spacing. In more open rooms, you'll fight enemies that punish you for standing still, forcing constant movement. Every enemy is placed with intent. Designed not just to challenge you mechanically, but to make you engage with the environment in a very specific way. The closest thing that you'll get to generic enemies in Silksong are the haunted pilgrims, these ghostly, hollowed-out husks of bugs that you encounter throughout Farloom. But even they aren't just palette swaps. Each type of pilgrim has a distinct role. Some are heavy aggressors, some are ranged attackers. They're visually similar, sure, but mechanically they're all doing different jobs. Here's something you might not consciously notice while playing Silksong, but your brain absolutely picks up on it. The world is constantly moving. And I don't just mean enemies, I mean everything. The background layers are alive. You'll see birds flying in the distant sky, insects crawling along walls, fireflies drifting through the moss grotto. Every single screen has something happening in the background or foreground, little touches of life that make Farloom feel like an actual ecosystem rather than a static game world. In the deep docks, the flames flicker and mining equipment clanks and churns in the background, molten metal drips from the walls. The entire area feels like it's breathing, like it has a heartbeat, and like it's on fire. This is a place that exists independent of you, independent of Hornet. It would continue to exist even if you weren't there. Even in areas where there are no NPCs, no friendly faces, the world doesn't feel empty. It feels full of life, full of rich history, full of purpose. Farloom isn't a dead ruin waiting for you to explore it. It's a living, breathing land. This level of environmental animation also serves as a practical effect. It helps you to orient yourself in the world. When you see a specific type of background creature or environmental movement, your brain immediately associates that with a particular area. The fireflies mean you're near the moss grotto. The falling embers and lava mean you're in the deep docks. These visual cues become part of your mental map, helping you to navigate Farloom without even needing to check the in-game map. So, our next topic is going to include some light, late-game spoilers. What this means is, I'm going to be discussing a rather infamous late-game area that you gain access to, and effectively discussing its design. If you don't mind this, go ahead and continue listening on. If you don't want to ruin the experience for yourself, feel free to use the timestamp shown on the video to skip ahead to the next section. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk about bile water. And let me just say this up front. I hate bile water. I hate traveling through it. I hate the enemies in it. I hate the mechanics associated with it. But do I think it's badly designed? Actually, no. I think it's pretty well designed, which is exactly why I hate it so much. Bile water is Silksong's swamp or sewer level. And if you've played enough video games, you know that swamp levels have a reputation. They're almost always the worst part of any game. They're dark, they're gross, they're full of annoying enemies and frustrating mechanics. Bile water is no exception to this rule. It's a toxic, runoff-filled nightmare full of contaminated water, sludge, and one of the absolute worst debuffs in gaming. Muck maggots. Let me explain muck maggots for those who haven't had the pleasure. When Hornet touches infected water, which by the way is everywhere, in bile water, her silk gauge gets completely covered in these little wriggling parasites. They don't just sit there looking gross. They actively drain your thread. And if that wasn't bad enough, they prevent you from healing. Even if you have a full bar of thread, binding will only remove the muck maggots. It won't heal you. So now you need to build up a second bar of silk without touching any more water, and then you can finally heal. The only other option is to rest at the nearest bench, which will likely be several rooms away through a gauntlet of enemies and hazards. It's infuriating. It's anxiety-inducing. It's designed to make you uncomfortable, and it does its job perfectly. Bile water is a great example of an intentionally hostile environment. Everything about the area is designed to play against you. The color palette is sickly greens and browns, toxic yellows and murky blacks. The air itself looks contaminated with those Tyndall effect particles taking on a grimy, polluted quality. The music is discordant, oppressive, claustrophobic. The enemies are fast, aggressive, and specifically designed to knock you into the water and drain your resources. The platforming is tight, with narrow ledges over pools of sludge, and platforms that, of course, crumble under your feet next to walls of spikes. And here's the thing. All of this is intentional. Team Cherry wants you to hate bile water. They want you to feel uncomfortable, anxious, rushed. They want you to make mistakes, because that's what bile water is in the context of Farloom's world. It's the runoff, it's the waste, the forgotten underbelly of the Citadel's industry. It's where everything unwanted flows and festers. It's not supposed to feel welcoming. It's not supposed to feel fair. It's supposed to feel like a place that doesn't want you there, that actively rejects your presence. The enemy design in Bile Water reflects this philosophy perfectly. They don't give you space to breathe, they pressure you constantly, forcing you to move, to react, to make split-second decisions in an environment where every mistake is punished harshly. The platforming challenges are similarly hostile. You're often forced to make precise jumps over infected waters, with flying enemies actively trying to knock you off course. The safe platforms are small, far apart, and temporary. The game is constantly asking, how good are you at this? How much pressure can you handle before you crack? And that's what makes Bile Water such a well-designed area. Even though it is miserable to play through, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's testing your mastery of Hornet's movement, your ability to manage the environment and the enemies under pressure, your capacity to stay calm in a hostile environment. It's the game asking, hey, you've been having a great time exploring this beautiful world. Now, have you actually been paying attention? The crazy thing is, Bile Water is technically optional if you don't want to reach for the true ending. You don't have to go through it to beat the game in Act 2, but the rewards for doing so are significant, and the shortcut it unlocks makes traversing other areas a bit easier. So the game is essentially offering you a deal. Suffer through this nightmare, you'll be stronger for it. Refuse, and you can take the safer path. This is an example of Team Cherry respecting player agency while still offering meaningful challenges for those who want to push further. By the time you finally escape Bile Water, probably having died a number of times, when you emerge into that next area, cleaner and brighter, less hostile, the relief you'll feel is palpable. That contrast that you feel is the point. Bile Water makes the rest of Farloom feel that much more welcoming by comparison. I want to talk about Hunter's March, because it's the perfect encapsulation of why Silksong's world design is so special. Hunter's March is full of these red ant warriors, fast, aggressive, militaristic enemies that move and attack with a sharp precision. It's the first area in the game where the difficulty noticeably spikes. These ants don't mess around. They pressure you, they coordinate, they punish hesitation. The first time I entered Hunter's March, I white-knuckled my way through it, barely scraping by. But here's the thing, if you take a moment after defeating an enemy and just wait, just stand still and watch, you will see something incredible happening. Small worker ants emerge from cracks in the environment. They approach the fallen enemy debris, the scattered body parts, and then they start carrying it away piece by piece. They drag the remains toward their nest. They'll even pick up shell shards and rosaries, scuttling off with them like tiny looters cleaning up a battlefield. The first time I saw this, I was probably 40-ish hours into the game. I had been through Hunter's March multiple times by that point, but I had always been moving too fast to notice. It was only when I stopped, really just stopped, that I had even caught the movement out of the corner of my eye, and I just stared. I watched the entire sequence play out like it was an old cartoon. I was completely enamored. And here's the thing, this detail accomplishes nothing. There's no achievement tied to it. It doesn't affect the gameplay. If this wasn't in the game, literally no one would have noticed its absence. But someone at Team Cherry, a real person, thought, you know what would be really cool? And then they spent hours coding the logic, animating the worker ants, testing it, polishing it until it felt just right. It says so much about Team Cherry's approach to world building. They didn't just build a game world, they built an ecosystem. They thought about what these creatures would do when you're not fighting them. They considered the society of the ants, their roles, their behaviors. They cared enough to add a detail that 90% of players will never see, simply because it makes the world feel real. And once I saw it, I started looking for more. I slowed down my exploration just a bit. I kept my eyes peeled for other hidden interactions, other tiny details tucked away for the most observant players. It became a game within the game. How many of these little moments could I find? How many of Team Cherry's love letters to their own world could I discover? That's the mark of a truly exceptional world design. It's not just about making the environments beautiful or shoving in challenging encounters. It's about creating a world that feels like it would exist beyond the boundaries of the player's interaction with it. It's about adding details that serve no purpose except to delight the people who take the time to notice them. It's about respecting your audience enough to put in that extra work, even when you know that most people will never see it. By the 60-hour mark, I was still finding new things, completely new areas I had somehow missed, enemies I had never encountered, environmental interactions I'd never noticed. Every single discovery felt like unwrapping a gift. The world of Farloom is so rich, so dense with content, that even after spending a huge amount of time with it, there's still more to find. It's a place worth exploring, worth remembering, and definitely worth returning to. Silksong's UI is barely there, and that's exactly the point. In a medium where so many games feel the need to plaster your screen with mini-maps, quest trackers, damage numbers, notification pop-ups, Team Cherry made a radical choice. trust the player to focus on the world itself. The UI in Silksong is so minimal, so elegantly restrained that you almost forget it exists. Your health bar, represented by Hornet's mask, sit in the top left corner. Below it, the silk bar and gauge. And that's pretty much it. During moment-to-moment gameplay, those are the only permanent UI elements on screen. Let's break down why this works so well. The Silk system uses a brilliant visual language to communicate its current state. The bar itself fills from left to right with white thread as you build it up through new attacks in combat. But here's the genius part. The gauge above it, a circular indicator, starts as a dark, almost black color. As the bar fills, the gauge begins to glow, transitioning to a bright, radiant white circle once you've maxed out your current thread count. The thread bar itself also gains this luminous brightness, practically demanding the player's attention. It's a visual shout. Hey, you can heal now. Hey, you have options for your skills. This isn't just good UI design, it's psychological conditioning. Your peripheral vision will pick up that glow, and your brain registers it as important information without needing to consciously check your HUD. When you collect items in Silksong, the game flashes a picture of the item in the bottom left corner, white text over a transparent black border showing the name. Quick, clean, unintrusive. For currencies like shell shards or rosary beads, a small icon and number tally appears in the top left, directly beneath the health and thread bars. If you lose currency, say from dying, the same visual language applies. Everything is contained to the edges of the screen, leaving the full breadth of your view clear and uncluttered. Team Cherry is showing you the absolute minimum necessary information to keep you informed, nothing more. Your intention stays in-world, focused on Hornet, the enemies, the environment, the game. This minimalistic philosophy extends to the menus as well, and here's where Team Cherry's design literacy really shines. Open the inventory menu, and you're greeted with a layout that's almost shockingly straightforward. Your key items are at the top, separated from consumables at the bottom. Your currently unlocked skills appear in a wheel on the left-hand side, alongside mask shards, which are health upgrades, thread spools, silk gauge upgrades, and your currency totals. Everything is sectioned into these three clean columns. Personal information on Hornet from the far left, enemies in the middle, and a text breakdown of highlighted areas on the far right. It's so easy to read. Even if you had never played a video game before, you could most certainly parse this information out without feeling overwhelmed. There's no bloat. There's no extraneous data, no menu options you'll never use, just the essentials presented clearly. The task menu operates on the same principle. Your current primary and side objectives are listed on the left, with primary tasks separated from optional wishes. The context for those tasks, sometimes including pictures and tallies of relevant collectibles, appear on the right-hand side. Now, Silksong actually has two versions of its map. When you're exploring, you can press a button and Hornet will actually pull out her own paper map, which overlays a slightly transparent view of your surroundings localized to her current position. This quick reference map lets you get a snapshot of where you are relative to other areas without breaking the pace of the game. And here's the kicker. The world doesn't stop. Hornet can still move, slowly, while looking at that map. You can take damage. The game refuses to pause just because you're momentarily lost. It's a small detail, but it again reinforces that idea that Farloom is a living, breathing place that doesn't care about your or Hornet's inconvenience. Double tapping the same button, you'll bring up the larger interactive map. This version allows both broad overview and granular close-ups. The maps you've charted are listed with their names and color-coded based on the environmental identity. Those greens, grays, reds we all talked about earlier, this map becomes your best friend on a first playthrough. Early game, it helps you orient yourself in an unfamiliar world. Late game, when Farloom has sprawled out into this massive, interconnected labyrinth, it allows you to quickly absorb the information that you need, including markers for benches, shops, and other points of interest to plot your next move. The brilliance of Silksong's UI is that it gets out of your way. It respects your intelligence, trusts your ability to navigate without hand-holding, and refuses to clutter your experience with unnecessary visual or auditory noise. Let's talk about Christopher Larkin. If you've been listening to the background music in this video, you probably already understand why Larkin was nominated at the Game Awards for Best Score in Music. Silksong's soundtrack is a vital component of the game's identity, working in tandem with the visuals and gameplay to create something that is intentional. Each area of Farloom has its own dedicated music, and the personality of those spaces is inseparable from their soundtracks. The music sets the tone, it dictates the pace, it breathes life into the adventure. It shifts between thrilling action pieces and mellow atmospheric moments with a balance that feels perfect. Like Larkin somehow reached into our brains and composed the exact emotional arc that we needed at any given moment. Let me give you a concrete example. Very early in the game, you'll encounter one of the first major bosses, and the track that plays is called Strive. The moment it kicks in, you feel it. Your heart rate picks up. The rapid tempo, driven by aggressive strings, mirrors the intensity of the fight. It's visceral, propulsive, thrilling. You're locked in a duel and the music is your hype man, pushing you to move faster, react sharper, be better. Listening to Strive outside of the game, I can visualize Hornet's lightning-fast movements, her dance of dodges and attacks, the adrenaline spiking after landing that final blow. Now, contrast that with Bone Bottom, the track sharing name with the primary early game hub. The emotional response is completely different. Where Strive is triumphant and kinetic, Bone Bottom is melancholic, almost wistful. It's a slow, contemplative piece that makes you pause and take a breath. There's a sadness to it, a sense of something lost or forgotten, but also a quiet curiosity, a gentle push to keep moving forward, to uncover what lies beneath the surface of Farloom. It's the sound of a place that was once vibrant, now clinging to the remnants of its former self. That contrast between Strive to Bone Bottom, action to atmosphere, is what makes Larkin's work so exceptional. He understands that a game's emotional landscape can't be flat. You can't just compose epic battle music and sad exploration music and call it a day. You need to guide the player through a journey, and that journey requires nuance, restraint, and an acute awareness of when to pull back and when to push forward with the heavy notes. But the music is only half the story. Silksong's sound design is equally remarkable, And it's in the small, diegetic details that the world, again, comes to life. Farloom is never silent. Never. Depending on the area, you'll hear the sound of wind rustling through caverns, insects scuttling across stone, rocks tumbling down cliffs, water from stalactites, lava bubbling and flowing through channels. When Hornet attacks, there's a sharp swish as her needle cuts through the air. When it connects, either hitting an enemy, a wall, or a spike trap, there's a distinct reactive sound that changes based on what she's striking. It's subtle, but your brain does pick up on it. Hornet's footsteps patter as she walks, picking up pace from dashing into a sprint. Her jumps have a layered sound design. First a grunt of exertion as she launches herself off the ground, and then a quick whoosh, like the sound of a hand fanning through the air. It's the sound of a physical object cutting through the wind at speed, and it's present in nearly all of her movement capabilities. The enemies have their own audio signatures too. Passive creatures make ambient sounds as they move through the environment. Aggressive enemies telegraph their attacks with audio cues, a screech, a roar, a metallic clang as they wind up. Over time, you start to notice these sounds instinctively. You hear the wind-up before you see the attack, and your fingers react before your brain consciously processes the threat. And Hornet has a voice, and not just a voice, a personality. Unlike the knight from the original Hollowknight, who was a silent protagonist, Hornet is an established character with her own implied history, her own perspective, her own way of seeing the world. She's older than she seems, and her voice reflects that. Of course, she doesn't speak English, none of the characters do. They speak an in-universe language, a melodic, insect-like chittering that feels both alien and oddly familiar. But even without understanding the literal words, you can parse meaning from the way that their speech is written. There's clear intonation, inflection, cadence, and emotion. Hornet is strong-willed, matter-of-fact, soft-spoken but commanding. She's helpful, even heroic at times, but there's a weight to her voice that suggests she's carrying something heavy, something she won't talk about unless pressed. When she speaks to other characters, you can hear respect, caution, curiosity, frustration, all layered within her character. It's remarkable how much personality comes through without a single word of dialogue being translated for the player. And in combat, the audio design amplifies everything. The sound of Hornet leaping into the air to dodge a boss's attack, the grunt as she swings her needle downward into a pogo, the satisfying thunk when she connects the white flash of light, emphasizing the strike. It all works together to create this kinetic, rhythmic flow. When Hornet takes damage, there's a quick, sharp boom, almost like a gut punch. It's snappy, immediate, and it drives home the fact that you just got hit. There's no mistaking it. Even healing has its own audio signature. When you bind your thread to recover health, there's this swirling, snapping sound as Hornet wraps the silk around herself. It's satisfying, almost meditative, until an enemy interrupts you mid-animation. Then there's a distinct sound as the bind is cancelled. Your thread is wasted and you get no healing. The audio feedback is crushing. You hear the failure before you fully register what happened, and every single time, it stings. These small details, individually minor, collectively transformative. They work together to create an audio landscape that's as rich and layered as the visual one. Silksong is beautiful, and it has the sound to match. Alright, let's talk about the story. And fair warning, I am going to discuss some thematic elements and character moments that might spoil certain aspects of the narrative. I'll avoid specifics on major plot twists, secret quest lines, and endgame content, but if you want to go in completely blind, maybe skip ahead to the next section's timestamp shown on the screen. Still here? Cool. Let's dive in. Silksong is structured into 3 acts. Act 2 represents the first point where players can choose to technically complete the game, while Act 3 is unlocked through optional side content. I'm not going to go into detail about what that content is, but I will say this. The decision to make the true ending optional is a bold one, and it says a lot about Team Cherry's philosophy when it comes to their narrative. They're not interested in forcing players down a single narrative path. They want you to choose how much you engage with Farloom, how much you want to uncover, and how far you're willing to go. Silksong is a game about religion, specifically religious zealotry, reverence, and the ways in which faith can be both a source of hope and a tool of exploitation. Farloom is a land steeped in religious culture. The citadel looms above a physical manifestation of spiritual authority, and the pilgrimage toward it is both a literal journey and a metaphorical one. The bugs you meet throughout the world are all climbing toward the same destination, but their reasons vary drastically. Some are true believers seeking spiritual enlightenment or communion with higher powers. Others are opportunists using the pilgrimage as a shield to justify their actions or advance their own agenda. And then there are those caught in the middle, people who don't know why they're climbing, only that everyone else is, so they might as well follow. It's an interesting exploration of how religion functions within a society. You see, Farloom is a world shaped by forces far beyond the understanding or control of its inhabitants. Within the broader universe and context of Hollowknight, there are godlike, even eldritch entities that exist on a scale so vast that the mortal bugs are little more than insects to them. Pun intended. These beings manipulate the world to suit their desires, and the consequences ripple down through generations. The normal bugs of Farloom don't fully comprehend these forces. They can't. All they know is that the world is broken, and they're searching for life's meaning in the cracks. Hornet's role in all of this is complex. She's not just a visitor to Farloom. She's been pulled into something much larger than herself, and the game slowly contextualizes her past, present, and potential future based on the choices she makes and the sacrifices that she's willing to endure. Unlike the Knight, who was a blank slate for the player to project onto, again, Hornet is an existing character. She has existing history. She has opinions. She has a voice. When Hornet speaks to certain NPCs, particularly the knowing, sage-like characters scattered throughout Farloom, there's an implicit understanding between them. They talk about higher powers, ancient forces, cosmic truths that the normal bugs wouldn't even have the framework to comprehend. And Hornet gets it. She's operating on a completely different level. You can hear it in the way she engages with these conversations. There's a weight to her words, a sense that she's carrying a burden alone. What I love about this is just how subtle it is. The game never overtly tells you Hornet's full backstory or lays out her relationship to these cosmic forces in exposition dumps. Instead, it's all reading between the lines, connecting dots left in the background of conversations, piecing together implications from offhand comments. It recontextualizes how you see Hornet, how she sees herself, and how she internalizes her role in the world. Okay, next, let's take a short stop to talk about one of my favorite characters in this game, Sharma, because Sharma is a goddamn treasure. You meet Sharma early in the game, standing in front of a large gate. He's singing this adorable little tune while he waits for it to open. And when Hornet opens the gate for him, he thanks her and continues his pilgrimage towards the Citadel. Ever optimistic, ever kind. And throughout the game, you'll encounter Sharma again and again, always pushing forward, always trying to do his best to help other pilgrims along the way. In a world full of multifaceted characters, bugs with hidden agendas, selfish drives, moral ambiguity, Sharma stands out as one of the few genuinely pure-hearted souls in Farloom. He's small, he's not a fighter, and logically, he shouldn't survive the dangers of the pilgrimage. The corpses littering the landscape are a constant reminder of just how brutal this journey is, and yet, somehow, Sharma keeps going. He outlasts bugs twice his size, bugs with weapons and armor and experience. Sharma just persists. And the game never explains why. It doesn't need to. Sharma's survival is a statement in and of itself. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's determination. Maybe the world just needs one kind soul to make it through this hell. Whatever the reason, seeing Sharma pop up later in the game always made me smile. He's a reminder that even in a place so hostile and unforgiving as Farloom, there's still room for hope, for kindness, for simple, uncomplicated goodness. Now, I don't want to spoil what happens to Sharma, you'll have to discover that for yourself, but what I will say is, Team Cherry understands the power of restraint. Sharma doesn't need a dramatic character arc or a tragic backstory. He's just Sharma, and that's enough. If there's one through line that ties Silksong's narrative and gameplay together, it's the concept of adaptation. Hornet is constantly evolving. Mechanically, yes, but also as a character. New tools, new skills, new crests, new allies, new perspectives. She changes throughout the game, and the story reflects that. Where the Knight in Hollowknight was defined by their lack of identity, a vessel, empty and moldable, Hornet is the opposite. She's already a fully realized person with her own agency, her own grace. She moves through the world with purpose. Hornet has thoughts about the goings-on of things, opinions on the people she meets, a moral compass that guides her actions even when the right choice may not be clear. And the game respects that. It doesn't try to strip Hornet of her identity to make her a blank slate. Instead, it invites you to step into her shoes, to see Farloom the way that she sees it, to understand her journey as hers, not yours. You're not controlling Hornet, you're experiencing Hornet. There's a meaningful difference there. The narrative progression mirrors the mechanical progression. As Hornet gains new abilities, she's not just getting stronger, she's becoming something new. Each crest she unlocks represents a shift in her combat style, her approach to conflict, her relationship with the world around her. Each new skill opens up previously inaccessible areas. She's evolving in real time, and you're along for the ride. This ties back into the religious themes we discussed earlier. Farloom is a land obsessed with transformation. The pilgrimage is fundamentally about becoming something more than you were. And Hornet, whether she realizes it or not, is undergoing her own pilgrimage. She's climbing towards an understanding of who she is, what she is capable of, and what role she is meant to play in the grand mystery of Farloom's future. By the end of the game, Hornet is not the same person who fell into the Moss Grotto. She's changed, and so have you, as the player. You've internalized her movements, her combat style, her way of navigating the world. You've become more fluent in the language of Silksong, and that journey, mechanical and narrative, intertwined and inseparable, is what makes the narrative progression of the game so special and so individualized. One last thing I want to touch on is that, again, Silksong is dense, like almost oppressively dense. The world of Farloom is so rich with content, layered with history and secrets and hidden interactions, that it can be genuinely overwhelming on a first playthrough. There were moments where I felt lost, unsure of where to go or what to do next, and honestly, that's a huge part of the experience. The best advice I can give is to let go of the immediate need to complete everything on that first run. Allow yourself some flexibility. Explore at your own pace. Don't stress about finding every item, unlocking every secret, or charting every corner of the map. The game is designed to reward curiosity, but it also is designed to let you miss things. And that's okay. That's intentional in the design. When you finally uncover the path to that next area, when you connect the dots and you realize where you need to go, there's this incredible feeling of satisfaction. You feel like a brilliant explorer, not because the game handed you a waypoint, but because you earned it. You paid attention, you experimented, you persevered. That feeling of discovery is the heart of Silksong. The narrative works the same way. So much of the story is tucked away in optional conversations, environmental details, and subtle character interactions. You have to read between the lines, piece together the larger picture from fragments scattered throughout the world. It's not a game that's going to spoon-feed you its lore. It trusts you to engage with it actively, to ask questions, to think. And when it all clicks, when you have that aha moment where everything falls into place, it's an extremely rewarding sense of accomplishment. Before we dig into what makes Silksong feel the way that it does, I need to establish some background. This isn't my first rodeo. I've been deep in the Metroidvania trenches for years. I grew up with the Game Boy Advance entries of Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission. Castlevania Circle of the Moon was actually my first game on that same console. I loved it then, and I still absolutely love it to this day. Aria of Sorrow sits right next to it in my heart. I've played and finished Symphony of the Night, though I'll admit my first playthrough was much more recent than I'd like to admit. And of course, I finished the original Hollowknight just last year. I'm setting my credentials here to say that I have a history of loving this genre. The core aspect of exploration, the gradual unlocking of abilities, the satisfaction of collecting items and piecing together a world. It's rewarding in a way few other gaming experiences can match. I love how different games within the genre will spin and push their traits into unique directions. Aria of Sorrow and Symphony of the Night are great, amazing examples of RPG and collectathon mechanics being married into the Metroidvania formula. You're hunting down enemies, hoping they drop particular abilities or loot that you can experiment with. There's a slot machine element to progression. It's RNG based, sure, but deeply satisfying when that rare drop finally hits. Metroid, on the other hand, is not an RPG. It's designed super tightly with, I dare say, much more diversity in its environments and a heavier focus on ability unlocks and environmental puzzles. In Metroid, the player really needs to understand Samus's abilities intimately in order to progress. It's much less about stats and grinding, more about knowledge and general execution. So where does Hollowknight's Silksong fit into all of this? Well, Silksong focuses on a few key pillars that make it a standout hit in the genre. Its sense of exploration and diverse environments, incredibly varied enemy pool, speed of movement, combat flow, and intense, difficult boss fights and gauntlets. The result is a game that feels both familiar and wholly within its own element. As I just mentioned, Silksong makes you feel like an explorer, yes, but even more so, it makes you feel like an apex predator. Hornet grows with new options in her kit, but as the player, so do you. Your understanding of the game continues to evolve as you play. Which crest are you using? What tools have you equipped? How comfortable are you with the combat? Can you chain dashes into your aerial combos without thinking? These are just mechanical questions. They're expressions of your personal growth as a player. You get more and more comfortable with Hornet's movement, her attacks, her range, her tools. You start to internalize the rhythm of the combat, the spacing that you need to maintain, the split-second windows where you can squeeze in an extra hit before retreating. You work with Hornet hand in hand, becoming a more serious threat to the different enemies scattered throughout Farloom. By the midpoint of the game, you're dominating encounters. Rooms that once felt overwhelming become your playground. Enemies that once demanded your full attention become simple obstacles for you to dispatch almost absent-mindedly. And here's the thing, Team Cherry knows this will happen. It's designed around the idea that you're going to get better, faster, more confident. The difficulty curve doesn't just scale with Hornet's abilities, it scales with your skill. Let me be clear, Silksong's difficulty curve is all over the place, and that's not a criticism. Depending on the environment, the enemies, the layout of the individual room, and whether an item or new path awaits you after progressing, the experience shifts dramatically. One moment you're cruising through a familiar area, feeling invincible. The next you're gripping your controller, desperately trying to survive a gauntlet that you were not prepared for. But here's the critical thing to understand. Just because something is fair doesn't make it good. And just because something is unfair doesn't make it bad. What matters is whether the game provides the player enough flexibility to adapt to the individual situation and the chance to overcome it. And Silksong, well, Silksong gives you options. The game's progression is bendable enough to warp around the individual player's progression at any given point. What I mean by this is, it's entirely possible for one player to really struggle with a specific boss or area, while another player completely breezes through it, solely based on the differences in unlocked abilities, tools, and skills. Maybe you stumbled into a late game area early and picked up a powerful tool that trivializes an encounter someone else found brutal. Maybe you just clicked with a boss's attack pattern in a way that another player didn't. This creates a fascinating dynamic where everyone's experience with Silksong is slightly different. We're all playing the same game, but the peaks and valleys of difficulty, the moment-to-moment triumphs and frustrations, actually varies pretty significantly from player to player. It's much more personalized difficulty without the game explicitly adjusting anything. Let's talk about why Hornet feels so damn good to control. Everything about her movement is an integral part of the game's feel. She's fast, nimble, agile, small, and sharp. Her movement has carried momentum. When you dash, you feel that burst of speed. When you attack, there's appropriate weight to the swing. And if you get knocked backwards, the physics feels right. There's appropriate sounds accompanying every action, the whoosh of a jump, the grunt of exertion, the sharp swish of her needle cutting the air. These details will stack on top of each other, creating a tactile experience that's deeply satisfying to the player. But what really sets Hornet apart is how smoothly her animations transition into one another. It's fairly easy to miss, but even something as simple as running in one direction, then jumping backwards, results in a unique animation, a backwards flip, before she lands with 10 out of 10 perfect form. The game is constantly accounting for the player's inputs and translating them into fluid, natural-looking movement. Whether Hornet's jumping off walls, pogoing enemies, latching onto ledges, and launching herself upward, everything feels effortless, weightless, polished. This isn't just good animation work. This is animation work in service of the gameplay. Every frame of Hornet's movement is designed to give you information. How much momentum are you carrying? Where you're going to be landing? When you're vulnerable, when you're safe. Your brain starts to internalize this language, and before long, you're not really thinking about movement, you're just moving. You see an enemy, you react. You see a platform, and you're already in the air. And that's the magic trick that Team Cherry pulls off. Hornet doesn't just look cool, she feels cool. And when a character feels this good to control, even the most mundane traversal becomes engaging. I think a lot of players will struggle with juggling the different combat options provided to them, and that's kind of the point. There's a lot that you get access to in Silksong, a lot you could do. Skills, tools, jump attacks, ground attacks, dashes, sprinting, learning how and when to use each option, the spacing that you need, the amount of time you need to commit to every single action. It's an ongoing struggle, a balance, and especially as you continue to change your build and experiment with new tools over the course of the game. Early on, you're probably going to default to a simple strategy. Jump, attack, retreat. Maybe throw in a dash to reposition. It works, it's safe. But as you unlock more options, you start to realize the game is asking you to engage with its systems more deeply. That powerful skill you just unlocked, it costs thread, and it locks you in place for a moment. Is it worth the risk? That new tool you found, it synergizes pretty well with another tool that you already have equipped, but only if you're willing to play more aggressively. Do you adapt your playstyle, or do you stick to what's comfortable? This is where I think Silksong reveals its true depth. The game isn't just about reflexes, it's about decision making. Every encounter is a series of micro decisions. Do I heal now or wait? Do I use a skill or save my thread? Do I engage the enemy or bypass it? Do I explore this side path or the main one? The combat is fast, yes, but the strategy is layered, complex, and deeply rewarding once you start to actively engage with it. Here I'm going to touch on, again, some light gameplay spoilers, this time more focused around actual game mechanics such as the crests and tools. It'll be fairly light, just talking about the specific mechanics that I chose to engage with and how they affected my playstyle. If you don't want to have yourself spoiled, go ahead and use that timestamp on screen to skip ahead to the next section. Let me talk about two specific upgrades that completely transformed my experience with Silksong. The Reaper Crest and a very, very innocent pair of blue dice. The Reaper Crest is an unlockable progression ability that will modify Hornet's attack animations to be a bit slower, but with higher reaching, wide swinging, arc-based attacks. The crest allows for some very different positioning strategies, and the running, or dash attack, actually launches Hornet directly into the air on execution. It's a completely different combat flow compared to the default moveset. At first, I wasn't so sure about using it, but after adapting to it and even trying some of the other crests, I realized that the Reaper crest specifically matched my preferred playstyle perfectly. I'm the kind of player who likes to balance my control of spacing, to keep players at a medium distance and punish them when they approach further. The Reaper Crest gave me the proper tools to do that. Though some other crests came fairly close, this particular one became my bread and butter for the entirety of the game. Then there are the blue dice. These things are busted. When equipped, they have a random % chance of completely negating damage to Hornet. And yes, it plays as absolutely broken as that sounds. This one single item saved my ass so many times. Is it random? Yes. Is it reliable? Absolutely. When it procs, when you see that blue glow and you hear that satisfying pop sound, you have a genuine sigh of relief mid-combat. It's like winning a mini lottery. And when it doesn't proc, well, that's just the base game. I only mention this specific tool because it's super ambiguous. The flavor text does not help you figure out what this thing does. Some people might just ignore it forever without realizing its full potential. And it's just one effect from one tool. There are tons of these things scattered throughout Farloom, and a good number of them are contenders for breaking the game even further to your benefit. The game really rewards players who want to experiment, who want to explore the different tools available to them. Don't sleep on seemingly useless items. Test everything. You never know what might become your next secret weapon. I want to talk about healing, because it's one of the most interesting mechanical shifts between the original Hollowknight and Silksong. In the original Hollowknight, healing worked like this. A gauge would fill up with energy as you attacked enemies. You would hold a button, and as that button was held, the energy would be consumed over time, within seconds, to heal the knight's health 1 pip at a time until that energy was fully consumed. You could not move while healing, but you could stop the heal midway if you realized that it was just too risky. You'd lose the energy, sure, but you were capable of repositioning immediately and maybe trying again in a more opportune window. It was flexible, forgiving, it was safe. Silksong does not let you off that easy. In Silksong, if you have the thread and you press that button to bind, you are locked in. You have just given the game permission to root you in your exact XY axis position, and there is nothing stopping an enemy from bashing your face mid-animation if you did this in a risky spot. The commitment is total. No backing out, no second chances. The benefit, however, is that Hornet, unlike the Knight, can heal herself mid-air. You can actually use the heal to suspend yourself in the air for a few moments, giving you an extra second or two to think about your next move while the animation finishes. This opens up some fascinating tactical possibilities. Maybe you're low on health, but there's no safe ground to heal on, so you jump, you bind mid-air, and you use those frames floating to reposition while you're recovering. It's risky, but when it works, it feels genius. And if the enemy hits you mid-bind, well, there's a unique animation and sound effect. The thread snaps, the animation stops halfway, and your thread is wasted. You get no healing. It's brutal, it's punishing, and it drives home just how important timing and positioning are in Silksong. Every heal is a gamble. Every bind is a statement that says, I think I'm safe here, and the game is more than happy to prove you wrong. This single mechanical change, making healing a deep commitment rather than a safety net, fundamentally alters the flow of combat. You can't just rely on spamming heals whenever you're low. You need to earn those healing windows. You need to understand the enemy attack patterns, find those openings, take calculated risks. It's stressful, yes, but it's also exhilarating. Because when you successfully heal in the middle of a chaotic boss fight, suspended mid-air while attacks whiff beneath you, you're winning. Alright, we have another more specific spoiler section of the video. Here I'll be touching on one of the last, arguably most difficult boss fights in the entire game. If you don't want to have any details spoiled for you here, please skip ahead to the time shown on screen. Okay, let's talk about Scar singer Carmelita. Carmelita is the queen of the Red Ant tribe. Once their greatest warrior, she's also the boss that pushed my patience to a pretty significant degree. Even bosses I fought after her did not give me as much pain. Once I finally won, that feeling of accomplishment was incredible, but man, I really had to work for it. I quickly went online after my first few attempts and saw a lot of people being very understandably upset. Some players were taking breaks after hours, days of fighting her, and looking back, her battle is a perfect example of the difficulty stemming from Silksong's core combat and boss design philosophy. First, her speed and aggression. Carmelita's tempo is relentless. There's nearly zero downtime. She is constantly coming at you, and her attack patterns have extremely tight, fast initial frames. Those, like Hornet herself, move between animations quickly. If you don't learn the tells that telegraph Carmelita's attacks, she's going to pummel you. Go on, ask me how I know. Carmelita also actively blocks attacks from Hornet. Now, she's not the first boss to do this in Silksong, but she's definitely the first boss to use it aggressively and as extensively as she does. She is a boss that is designed to teach you respect. You need to respect her tells. It's hard to do. She's got a crazy number of attack variations, and they're all intense. Even more so as the fight continues and you push through her different variations through phases. If you get attacks off safely, you can't get greedy, back off. Learn to fight her at the right pace. It took a while, but very slowly I could feel myself starting to adapt. I was internalizing how much time I had between her attacks to strike, and I was taking those risks more and more confidently. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but I could feel it getting closer, so much so that I could burst through the initial portions of her phases really without breaking a sweat. But here's where the fight gets interesting. This fight actually forced me to learn an entirely new combat mechanic. Okay, well, the mechanic isn't new per se. It always had been there, but this was the first time, let's say, that I was very, very heavily encouraged by Team Cherry to use it. I'm talking about the parry mechanic. Oh yeah, did I not mention that? Silksong does have a parry mechanic, but it's different than what you might expect. In some action games, say Sekiro, Liza P, hell even Expedition 33, parrying is a standalone function that exists within the core combat experience. It has a dedicated button, a distinct effect, and a clear payoff. The combat in those games is almost entirely built around supporting parrying as a core segment. However, Silksong's parry is more like a byproduct of the way attacks themselves function, and it's not expressed in a way that really encourages players to engage with it intentionally. If an enemy is using a weapon and they attack, and then Hornet meets their attack head-on with her own, they clash for an instant. Both attacks are neutralized. Playing Silksong, you'll likely notice moments of this happening, but the risk-reward is so minimal. That reward is so risky to intentionally execute this move that most players will think it's neat if they notice it happen accidentally, but they definitely will not try to force that interaction. Well, Carmelita had me specifically working to match her blow for blow, and more specifically, to parry her thrown daggers. See, she has a move where she launches daggers at an arc angle outward towards Hornet's position. This move kept clipping me. I just kept getting so frustrated with it, and then I remembered there was a mechanic that would allow me to proactively prevent being damaged by ranged attacks. Then I started working across my next few attempts to parry those daggers. I immediately noticed a difference in my performance. Trust me, Carmelita's scary, but she becomes a lot less scary when her ranged options become absolutely useless. It took a few more tries. I started to become more and more comfortable with the dance of her attacks. Over a course of hours, I learned when to strike, when to retreat, when to parry, and when to heal. Finally, I landed that winning blow. The rush I felt in that moment was unlike anything else I'd experienced in gaming recently. I was so full of pride. I had learned, I had adapted, I had mastered something that felt almost nigh impossible just hours before. That right there is the Silksong experience in a nutshell. The game beats you down, and it forces you to actively engage with its systems, and then it rewards you when you finally get it. One of the most satisfying aspects of any Metroidvania is the moment you return to an early game area with all of your late game abilities and just demolish everything in your path. Silksong delivers on this fantasy in spades. Remember the Moss Grotto? Those slow, lumbering enemies that once demanded your attention? By the time you're 20, 30, 40 hours into Silksong, you're tearing through them like tissue paper. You're pogoing off their heads without slowing down, chaining dash attacks into aerial combos, clearing entire rooms and corridors within seconds. But here's what makes it even better. The game doesn't just make you stronger, as I keep mentioning, it makes you better. Your abilities have increased, sure. Hornet's tools and crests have given you more options, absolutely, but the difference is you. Your understanding of spacing, timing, movement, combat flow, all of that has evolved. Hornet doesn't just become overpowered, the player becomes more and more skilled, and that distinction is important. When you breeze through an area that once gave you trouble, it's not because the game handed you a win, it's because you earned it. You put in the hours. That feeling, that tangible sense of growth is what separates a good Metroidvania from a great one, and Silksong is firmly in that latter camp. So what does this all add up to? Silksong is a game that respects your time, your intelligence, and your willingness to engage with its systems. It doesn't hold your hand, it doesn't apologize for its difficulty, but it also does not punish you unfairly. Every death is a lesson, every boss fight a puzzle, every area is an invitation to explore, experiment, and play. The moment-to-moment gameplay is fast, fluid, and satisfying. The progression systems, both mechanically and skill-based, work in tandem to create a sense of constant growth. The world is dense, mysterious, and rewarding for those who take the time to dig into it. And the challenge is real, but it's fair. And when you overcome it, the payoff is immense. Silksong isn't just a sequel to Hollowknight, it's an evolution of everything that made the original great, refined and expanded into something that feels both familiar and wholly entirely new. It's a game that demands your full attention and rewards you for giving it. It's a game that trusts the player to rise to the occasion and then celebrates with you when you do. And honestly, that's all I could ever ask for from a game. Alright, let's talk about the discourse. The debates that had filled up social media feeds and Reddit threads since Silksong's release. The question that seems to be on everyone's mind, is Silksong too hard? My answer is no. but I understand why people think that it is. Team Cherry provides players with a pretty great amount of flexibility within a fairly tight combat design. The problem, or rather the challenge, is that enemies and environments are tilted towards countering the fast, action-oriented nature of Hornet's movement and the varied tool options. Where the Knight in the original Hollow Knight was methodical, almost tank-like in the approach to combat, Hornet is the exact opposite. Silksong is definitely harder than Hollow Knight. On average, enemies again are not one note. They have multiple potential attacks that includes varying ranges, speeds, and damage outputs. You start with a total of 5 health, and there are enemies within the starting area that deal 2 healths worth of damage. The game punishes you for taking unnecessary risks or mishandling Hornet's movements. It's unforgiving in a way that the original game wasn't, at least not so early on. All of this to say, I think there's a few factors that comes to this perception of unfair difficulty. First, players are getting overwhelmingly beaten up by early game bosses who, again, have this large number of varied attacks that deal significant damage. These don't feel like tutorial bosses. If you're coming into Silksong expecting the absolute gentle on-ramp of Hollow Knight, you're going to get your teeth kicked in. Second, players aren't comfortable with how committed Hornet's movement and attack animations really are. You can't take back too many of the choices you make. Once you decide to move or attack in a certain way, you're locked in. There's no oops, never mind button. You commit and you live with the consequences. This is a massive shift from the original game where the Knight's slower, more deliberate movement gave you some more time to course correct. But here's my take. The difficulty is 100% intentional, and I do believe it is fair. I believe it works incredibly well given the insane amount of options and individual progression paths that the game provides. If we put this in context, Silksong is a sequel, and it's not just any sequel, it's a sequel to Hollow Knight, a game with one of the most dedicated, hardcore fan bases in modern gaming. Many fans of the original Hollow Knight do not just play the game, they absolutely mastered it. Speed runs, challenges like no-hit runs, where players will beat Hollow Knight without ever taking damage from an enemy, and yeah, that is as impressive as it sounds. What I'm saying is that Silksong was always going to launch with a significant number of fans, potentially, absolutely primed to breeze through the game if Team Cherry had designed and scaled the difficulty in the exact same vein as the original. They clearly thought very long and hard about how to meet their existing fan base halfway, while also making the game feel fair for new players who might pick up Silksong without any prior experience. From my perspective, they achieved a pretty great balance by giving both Hornet and the player such a large number of movement and combat options, while ensuring that all of the enemies and the environment itself includes a matching amount of complexity and variety. The game isn't hard because Team Cherry wants to punish you, it's hard because they respect you. They trust that you'll rise to the challenge, you'll adapt to the challenges. You will overcome. But I understand that not everyone is going to feel that way. Some players are going to bounce off of Silksong's difficulty, and that's okay. It's not a failure on their part or the game's part, it just means that the game is not for them, and there's no shame in that. For those who are struggling but want to push through, I have some advice. Slow down. If you hit a wall, take a detour, explore. It's easy to want to bash your face against a challenge head on. I do that all the time. But if you feel like you need to eke out that win, try pushing side paths and gathering more upgrades. You'd be surprised how significant that increase in damage and survivability becomes as you unlock further abilities. And if you're specifically losing to a boss, say you're just getting absolutely steamrolled, here's what I like to do. Go in with that expectation that you won't win. Just observe. Watch their attack patterns, look for openings where you can sneak 1 or 2 hits in, play as passively as your body will allow you to. Then, slowly ramp up your aggression. As you realize you're getting hits in, that boss feels less scary. You flip the script, you put on more and more pressure. A lot of what I found is that learning to read boss patterns, understanding when they're aggressive, and when you can be aggressive, recognizing the changes in their phases can help to push through just enough to get that win. The difficulty in Silksong isn't a wall, it's a ladder, and every rung you climb makes you a better player. Listen, I'm not a massive fan of Hollowknight. I know, sacrilege, but hear me out. Like many people, it took me many repeated tries to have the original game finally stick. I sort of had to force my way through the first few hours of Hollowknight before it finally clicked with me. The pacing felt slow, the world was lonely. I appreciated what it was doing, but I didn't love it, not at first. Silksong honestly did not have this problem, and it has nothing to do with my familiarity of the original game. These are honestly very different experiences. Silksong is designed so tightly and enforces such a great sense of pacing, exploration, and action that it felt like there was never a dull moment. From the opening minutes through to the final finale, I never felt like the game was wasting my time. I never felt bored. Lost, maybe. Frustrated, absolutely. But bored, never. Comparing Silksong to Hollowknight is a bit unfair to both games. They are extremely different experiences. The DNA is there, sure, but thinking these are going to be comparable outside of that shared foundation is like comparing apples to oranges. Or, in a related gaming sense, it's like comparing From Software's move from designing Dark Souls to creating Bloodborne or Sekiro. Similar DNA, but the focus of the mechanics is fairly different. One may not be necessarily better than the other, they're just different. They appeal to different sensibilities. What makes Silksong special in the current gaming landscape? Honestly, the biggest differentiating factor is the level of insane polish and care from Team Cherry, combined with the insane amount of player-first content at the value of a fast food trip. Oh yeah, the game was released for $20. It's been talked about to death when this game first launched, but I couldn't not mention it. We live in a time where just breathing air is getting more expensive. Team Cherry could have easily milked their fan base for a fortune, but instead, they effectively gave away the game for free. I mean, $20 is still $20, don't get me wrong, but the value here, the sheer amount of content, the level of polish is nigh unheard of in modern game releases. And here's the kicker. There's a completely free expansion coming to the game. You heard that right. They're giving us even more substantial content to play through in 2026 with Hollowknight Silksong Sea of Sorrow. It's one thing to admire a company for such pro-consumer practices. It's another thing for that company to also produce an insanely good product. If there's one particular factor of Silksong's design that I believe is a perfect lesson for both new and veteran game developers, it's this. Work to add meaningful content to your game with the expectation that most players will miss it. Let me say that again in slightly different wording. Care about your content, but don't force players to interact with all of it. Be comfortable with the idea of adding enemies, areas, items, lore, all of it, that are either very well hidden or too difficult for most people to access. It's easier said than done, I know, but meaningful world building comes from the detail in the periphery. It's like being at a top-class buffet. You want to try everything. You may just eat enough and move on, but the food is ever enticing, and the knowledge that there's more, always more, makes the experience richer. So many games are created where developers will railroad players into content in order to try and justify their price point against the cost of development. Team Cherry does not do this. In fact, they went in the completely opposite direction. They know that a significant portion of their game will likely not be seen or experienced by most players, but the quality, the love, the care that they put into that content is still the same. Because for the players who do experience it, they'll appreciate it that much more. This is a philosophy that respects the player. It trusts that the people who engage deeply with your creative work will find the treasures hidden beneath. And it understands that not every player needs to see everything from the game in order to be valuable. The journey itself is personal. The discoveries are earned, and that's what makes them meaningful. Team Cherry also understood something else. Polish matters. Every frame of animation, every sound effect, every environmental detail, it all adds up. Silksong is not a game that was rushed out to meet a deadline. It feels like a game that was finished. And in an area where ship now, patch later has become this weird industry standard, that's genuinely refreshing. If you're a developer watching this, here's my takeaway. Don't compromise on your vision. Don't cut corners to hit that release date. Don't dilute your creative intent to appeal to the widest possible audience. Create content that requires effort to engage with. Trust that there's an audience out there who will appreciate what you're doing, and when you finally ship it, make sure it's something you're proud of. Because that pride shows. It radiates through every aspect of the experience. Players can feel when a game was made with love, and they respond to it in kind. Silksong harkens back to the greatest moments of the Metroidvania genre, while incorporating the difficulty and intentionality known in Souls-like games. The exploration, the seemingly endless stream of unique experience and content, it all speaks to me in a way few games do. It's rare that I actually want to go back and replay a game immediately after finishing it. Most games, even the ones I love, feel complete after the credits roll. I'm sort of exhausted with the experience. I've seen what they have to offer, I've experienced the journey, and while I might revisit them years later, there's no immediate pull to dive back in. Silksong is different. Even after spending over 60 hours with the game, even after reaching the true ending, even after uncovering as many secrets as I could possibly find, I feel like there's more. I know that there's more. more areas I haven't fully explored, more enemies I haven't even encountered, more secrets tucked away in corners that I haven't checked. And more importantly, I want to experience it again. I want to try a different build. I want to see how the different crests will change the flow of combat. I want to challenge myself with restrictions, push my limits, and see just how good I can get. And that's the mark of something truly special. Silksong occupies your mind. I mean, days after finishing it, I'm still thinking about boss fights, still theorizing about lore implications. It's a game that stays with you long after you've put down that controller. Hollowknight Silksong is a masterpiece. It's not perfect, no game is, but it is a game that respects your intelligence, rewards your curiosity, and challenges you to be better. It's a game that trusts you to engage with its systems, to explore its world, and to discover its secrets at your own pace. And it's another indie game that just proves definitively that you don't need a 100-person team to create something truly special. You just need vision, passion, an unwavering commitment to quality. Team Cherry set out to make a game they clearly wanted to play themselves. And in doing so, they created something that countless others want to play as well. And that's the dream, isn't it? To make something that resonates, to create an experience that people will remember, discuss, and return to for years to come. Silksong achieves that. It's a game that will be talked about, analyzed, and celebrated for a long time. And I, for one, am just grateful that it exists. If you've stuck around this far, I want to thank you so much for giving this a listen. I know these videos are long. This is definitely going to clock in over 2 hours, but I genuinely believe that some games deserve this level of analysis and more. They deserve to be examined, appreciated, and discussed in detail, and Silksong is absolutely one of those games. Now I'm looking forward to some new releases, which I'm incredibly excited to talk about. First up, Romeo is a Dead Man, the latest from Suda51 and Grasshopper Manufacturer. See, I grew up being a fan of their work, Killer 7, No More Heroes, Let It Die, games with this amazing Japanese punk aesthetic that just oozes style and creativity. I can't wait to dive into the craziness of their next release and break down what makes their approach to game design so unique. After that, I plan to cover Resident Evil 9. Now, I'm a big fan of survival horror. I have played and replayed all of the mainline Resident Evil games since the PS1 days. Resident Evil 2, the original, is my absolute favorite in the series, so I'm beyond excited to see this newest version of Leon and what Capcom has in store for the franchise's next chapter. Both of these videos will follow the same long-form format that you've come to expect from this channel. Deep dives into game design, player experience, and really what makes these games tick. If that sounds interesting to you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon for notifications. Even if you're just putting me on in the background while you work on other stuff, I sincerely appreciate your viewership. And here's the thing, I want to hear from you. Please give me recommendations for different games or topics to cover. I love all genres, so really anything goes, whether it's a massive AAA release, a tiny indie gem, or something in between. If you think it's worth discussing, let me know in the comments. This channel is meant to be as much for you as it is for me, and I want to make sure I'm covering the games and topics that genuinely interest my audience. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all soon.